Sophie, till late in the third quarter, you guys were struggling offensively in that frame. Second half in general didn't feel the same as the first half on that end. Did something change for you guys? What did you see as kind of leading to stalling on that end?
Yeah, I think we were just kind of slow. And every time that we're slow, especially defensively, it just somehow affects our...
What if I told you that sometimes the biggest threat to a basketball team isn't the opponent standing in front of them, but the decisions or indecisions made on their own sideline? You see,
Indiana's lost 3 of their last 4, Washington 5 of their last 6. Hole, corner 3. Here's Boston, the offensive rebound, flips inside to Howard, who lays it in.
fans come in expecting a game to be won or lost by talent, hustle, or maybe even luck. But the reality, as Indiana Fever fans just witnessed, is that a winnable game can slip away not because of what the other team did, but because of how your own team responded when things started to unravel. And that is
You go step-up screen, flare on the weak side, and this is where she started her WNBA career, right here in Indiana. Mitchell, aggressive, bounces to Howard, splits the double team, finds its way to Boston.
exactly why Sophie Cunningham's post-game honesty hit like a thunderclap, because her words didn't just diagnose the symptoms, they pointed directly at the cause. Now, before we dive into the unraveling of Indiana's 88-84 collapse against the Washington Mystics, let me confirm what you already know. You clicked this because you want to understand how a team with a double-digit lead, with momentum, with playoff positioning on the line, still managed to hand away a victory to a bottom-dwelling squad. And here's the common belief. Most people think losses like these happen because the other team got hot, or because the roster was too depleted by injuries. That's the comforting explanation. But here's the contrarian take. The Fever didn't lose because Washington played out of their minds. They lost because Indiana failed to make the most basic adjustments, because strategy froze while the players kept grinding, and because the leadership on the bench never matched the urgency of the players on the court. The proof is written all over the box score, the film, and the post-game quotes. And tonight, we're going to break it all down. The collapse, the coaching, the players' fight, and why Cunningham's blunt assessment may be the line in the sand this team needs. So here's the plan. First, we'll look at how Indiana built a commanding lead and then let it melt away, point by point. Then, we'll dig into the coaching decisions, especially Stephanie White's rotations, or lack thereof, that left fans shaking their heads. After that, we'll flip the focus to the players, the ones who actually delivered enough to win and why their efforts were wasted. And finally, we'll zoom out to the bigger picture, what this loss means for Indiana's playoff push, for White's job security, and for the identity Cunningham says they've lost. Now let's rewind to the moment when everything looked comfortable. Indiana had a 13-point lead in the second quarter, up 40-27. They were cruising. Boston was bullying defenders inside. Mitchell was facilitating beautifully. Sims was pushing the tempo, and Cunningham was flying around like a spark plug. The Fever were dictating pace, forcing Washington into hurried possessions, and it felt like the kind of night where the building would stay loud until the final buzzer. But then, almost instantly, the tide turned. Washington ripped off a 22-7 run, and what was once a commanding lead became a tied game at 47. Here's the kicker. That run wasn't fueled by some superstar takeover. It wasn't a case of Indiana just running into an unstoppable force. It was fueled by Indiana's own mistakes. Turnovers, careless fouls, late defensive rotations. 21 fouls committed, sending Washington to the line for 26 free throws. That's not the referee's whistle being unfair. That's discipline vanishing in real time. And the Mystics? They didn't waste the gift. They hit their shots, crashed the boards, and executed like a team that realized Indiana was cracking. Think about the psychology here. You're at home, you've got the lead, and suddenly, possession after possession, your offense is getting stuck. That's not my phrase, that's Stephanie White's. What she described afterward as the offense stalling into Kelsey Mitchell isolation plays was exactly what fans saw unfold. And when a coach admits after the fact that the team kept over-dribbling, standing around, and just waiting for Mitchell to bail them out, the natural question is, why wasn't anything changed mid-game to stop it? Why wasn't spacing adjusted? Why wasn't Chloe Bibby, a 42% three-point shooter, even given a chance to stretch the floor? White's reasoning: defensive matchups. She said she didn't trust Bibby against Washington's lineup. But here's the irony. While Bibby sat, the Fever still gave up 26 free throws, still surrendered wide-open threes, and still got out-rebounded by Kiki and Sonia Citron. In other words, the very issues White said she was guarding against happened anyway. And the fans, they're left asking, if your system was already crumbling, why keep the safety valve locked to the bench? But before we drop the hammer too early, let's give credit where it's due. Indiana's players didn't roll over. Boston was a force, 20 points, 9 boards, and an interior presence that Washington had no consistent answer for. Mitchell may have been asked to do too much, but she still delivered 14 points and 9 assists, driving and kicking under suffocating pressure. Cunningham gave you 8 points, 6 assists, and 3 steals, including that electrifying moment when she picked off a pass and drilled a 3 on the other end. Odyssey Sims, barely in the door on a hardship contract, chipped in 11 points, while providing something the Fever desperately needed, a true ball handler who could steady possessions. These performances weren't empty calories. They were the kind of nights you expect to translate into a win. And that's what makes the loss so bitter. The effort was there, the production was there, the fight was there. What wasn't there was the adjustment to harness it. Let's zoom in on Sophie Cunningham for a second, because her post-game words carried the weight of someone who isn't afraid to challenge the narrative. She didn't hide behind injuries. She didn't chalk it up to bad luck. She flat out said, "We've got to get back to being dogs." That wasn't a soundbite for motivation boards. That was a direct acknowledgement that Indiana has lost its edge, its identity. Opponents don't fear them right now, and that's why even a rebuilding team like Washington can come into their house and flip the script. Contrast that with Stephanie White's remarks. She pointed to fouling, to offensive stagnation, to injuries, and even framed it as a bigger learning experience. And while those points aren't wrong, they miss the urgency fans and players are demanding. Identifying the problem after the fact isn't the same as preventing it in real time. And in this league, where playoff margins come down to a single game, that difference matters. That here's the second best point of the night, and maybe the most haunting one for Indiana. This isn't new. This pattern, strong stretches evaporating into preventable collapses, has haunted the Fever all season. Build a lead, get comfortable, stop dictating, and watch it evaporate. The numbers tell you it's not a fluke. And when patterns become habits, that's not about talent. That's about leadership, preparation, and accountability. And that's where Cunningham's honesty cut deeper than any stat line could. She didn't just say they lost. She said they got outworked. And in professional basketball, when the opponent isn't as talented but still outworks you, that falls on culture. Now for the best point, the one that really flips the spotlight. Indiana didn't just lose a game, they lost an opportunity. With the playoff race tightening, every win matters, especially against teams at the bottom of the standings. Dropping to 7th because you couldn't close out a game you led by double digits is about as costly as it gets. It's not just about one bad night. It's about the message it sends to the locker room. Do the players believe their grind will be rewarded? Do the fans believe the coaching staff will maximize the roster they've got? Because if that belief fractures, then even the return of Caitlin Clark down the line won't patch the cracks. Momentum in sports isn't just about wins and losses. It's about trust. And right now, Indiana's trust feels shaken. Let's talk framing. If you're an Indiana fan, what are you left with? On one side, you have players giving you everything. From Boston's dominance inside to Cunningham's grit and Sims' unexpected spark. On the other, you have a coach explaining after the fact that the offense was stagnant, that fouling was an issue, that injuries are tough to overcome. One side is asking for accountability and toughness. The other side is giving explanations without ownership. That's the clash fans can't ignore, and that's why the frustration feels sharper than just a typical loss. This isn't about blaming one game. It's about whether Indiana has the leadership alignment needed to close games when it matters most. And before we close, let's rehook the question that started this entire spiral. When you watched that lead evaporate, did you feel like Washington took it, or did you feel like Indiana gave it away? The numbers, the film, the quotes, all point to the latter. And that's the heart of expectations versus reality. Fans expect collapses to be about the opponent catching fire. The reality is, Indiana's undoing was written by their own hand. And unless that changes, these collapses won't stop. So here's where we leave it. The Fever have the talent to win. They have the fight to win. But do they have the direction to win? That's the open loop this season has to answer. Because if Sophie Cunningham's demand to get back to being dogs is the expectation, then the reality is it starts with accountability from the top down. Otherwise, 7th place could slip further, and a playoff berth that felt within reach could evaporate just like that second quarter lead. Now, let's throw it to you. Should Stephanie White be held accountable for these decisions? Was this collapse about coaching, about injuries, or about something deeper in Indiana's identity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following,